Welcome to our session on assessing program outcomes for students with moderate to severe learning needs in inclusive settings. I promise that we are going to tell you a little bit about ourselves and where we work. But before we do that, we're just going to jump right into a do now where we're going to show you a video of one of the kiddos that we work with in our program and give you an opportunity to chat with some people sitting next to you. So we're going to make sure bright and early on a Friday morning that you have some opportunities to actively engage right away. So we're going to show you a video of one of our students named Brian. We do have thanks to Brian's family for giving us permission to share this today. And while you're watching this video, I want you to think about a few questions that we're going to ask you to chat with a partner about afterwards. What unique challenges might Brian's team encounter when determining how to assess his skills in the inclusion environment? What role will assessment play in ensuring Brian has a meaningful inclusion experience? And how might the team think about assessment for Brian? So keep those in mind. We're going to watch a few minutes of our friend here.
Everybody wants to be a
Good
part
morning,
of
Brian.
You can get that kind of expertise.
Good morning.
And this is just an activity that our network of schools does every morning with the kids. It's kind of like an assembly that gets them excited for school every day. And the boy working with him is one of his peer buddies that helps them with different tasks throughout the day.
Hey, Brian.
Baby stool.
Brian. Squanto helped the pilgrims build. What did he help them build?
Are you taking us a picture?
Can you help me read this? Squanto helped the pilgrims build homes.
What does Squanto help the pilgrims build? Homes. Shoot. Alright, Bryce, if we shoot. Bryce, stop.
I want.
Can you help me read this?
Please. Okay, Izzy, did you glue it?
Squanto. What did he help the pilgrims build? Yeah, good job, houses.
Good morning, Brian. Good morning, Isabel. Good morning, Rita. Good morning, Jay.
And he has a job, you'll see him right here. His job is to be the homework collector every day and in his class.
Good morning, Rita.
5th grade.
Daniel, go ahead and move your clip up with you. All done.
Starting right away, Good. Thank you, Joseph, for coming in quietly. I like how team 2 is all working already and 0. Well, I'm going to give them points. Team 1 is also working very well.
And it's kind of hard to see, but in here he's actually working on doing order of operations as part of his like math that work or do now.
We'll talk about that. Not as long as you might think. Oh, wow. Okay, so take a few minutes just to find a shoulder partner sitting next to you and chat about what unique challenges might this team right here, encounter when they're determining how to assess Brian's skills in the inclusion environment. What role will assessment play in ensuring that Brian has a meaningful inclusion experience, and how might the team think about assessment for Brian? So let's take a few minutes just to chat. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. So we hope that watching this quick video of one of our students and having an opportunity to think through some of these questions with your colleagues gets you thinking about assessment. Our session today is on assessment in the inclusion environment, both of our overall program and of our individual students. And we're going to use Brian as a bit, he's just one of the students in our program, but we're going to use him as a bit of a lens for our whole presentation today. So before we jump in, I'd love for Hannah just to share a little bit about sort of Brian's history with us.
Yeah, so Brian came, last year was his first full year at our school. He had come the previous school year around March or January. So this is like his second full year with us. And when he had come to us as a fourth grader, he had come from a special day class setting where you know, he had a lot of behaviors that tantruming behaviors. At the beginning of the year, we had a lot of, he would actually like take his clothes off in the classroom. So he wasn't always able to just like do a job and sit down and work independently like you just saw in that video. It took a lot of teaching and having him really get acclimated to the environment. So, we've come a lot. We still see some like aggressive behaviors like we had in the past, but it's nowhere near where it was at like when he first came to us, and he's really grown a whole lot. Just as that video alone is like leaps and bounds from where he was at just about 2.5 years ago. So.
And I just wanted to say one more thing too. I think that it's really fascinating because at the time when we did the observation, he was in a special day classroom, one para to every student, and that was his least restrictive environment. And just by us raising the bar and by working collaboratively as a team, and it's certainly not perfect, this is now his least restrictive environment. So it's pretty exciting to think about the change that inclusion can make for students.
So here's our agenda for the next hour and 15 minutes. We're going to go through a brief introduction overview, tell you a little bit about where we work and the program that Brian's in. Caitlin will talk about overall program evaluation. So when we talk about assessment, we don't want to just think about looking at where our kids are, but we want to think about looking at where we are as the adults, and are we doing what we said we were going to do for our kids. Hannah will take us through individual student assessment, and then we'll close out with database collaboration and what that looks like between our general education and special education staff. We have a lot packed in, and we're already behind our schedule. I do want people to feel free to ask questions as they come up. We may ask you to hold something until the end if we're really running out of time, because we want to make sure we get our content as well. But please feel free to ask questions as they come up. And friends online, we haven't forgotten about you. So who are we? My name's Genevieve Thomas. I'm the Director of Integrated Special Education at Rocketship Education. I'll tell you more about Rocketship in a minute.
I'm Hannah Gray. I'm the integrated special education specialist, and this is my 3rd year at Rocketship.
And I'm Caitlin Gallagher, school psychologist, and this is also my 3rd year at Rocketship.
And so we want to learn a little bit about who else is in the room. So Caitlin's going to take us through a brief intro activity here.
Yeah, we were just curious about who our stakeholders were here. So if you're a general education teacher, if you could stand up. Yay. Special education teacher. Okay, or raise your hand. Yep, program managers. Any program managers or special education directors here? Awesome, welcome. Okay, school psychologist or other service providers, speech, OT, welcome. Okay, great. And then we also wanted to get a feel for what environments you're working in. So if you're in a preschool setting, if you could stand up or raise your hand. Okay, elementary, so K5. Okay, what about middle school? Okay, and high school. Okay, great. Did I miss anyone? Are there any other? College, awesome. So college transition program or? Awesome, cool. So we have lots and lots of different people here that work in different settings. So I'm hoping that this is applicable to everyone.
Thanks, Caitlin. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. If you have questions specifically about Rocketship or our program, I'm happy to hang out afterwards and talk a little bit more. Rocketship, we're a network of public charter elementary schools. We operate 9 elementary schools here in San Jose. We have a school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we just opened our first school in Nashville, Tennessee. We serve about 6,000 students, and across our whole network, about 85% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and about 67% of our students are English language learners. Our mission at Rocketship is to eliminate the achievement gap between low SES and high SES students within our lifetime. Not ambitious at all. I think we're almost there. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of the history of inclusion at Rocketship. Rocketship's been around since 2007, and from the get-go wanted to run an inclusion program. Our founder and CEO, Preston Smith, had come from working in environments that were not inclusion environments, and he really had a firm belief that was the best way to educate students with disabilities. So in the beginning, Rocketship was, hooray, inclusion! As Rocketship went on, this is my 3rd year with Rocketship as well, we started to get more students with moderate to severe disabilities who just sort of our previous inclusion program wasn't enough for them. So we sort of thought, some of these kids need a lot of support. I know, we'll use one-to-one paraprofessionals. We'll just attach a one-to-one with these kids, send them forth into their gen ed environment, and it'll be fine, right? And so as we're going along, we thought, yikes, that's not getting us the results we wanted for a number of reasons. Kids weren't developing independence. They weren't really integrated. They were just kind of in the classroom with their one-to-one. It's also really expensive to get one-to-ones for every one of your students with more moderate to severe needs. So out of that, our SIPP program was born last year. SIPP stands for Specialized Inclusion Program. And that's a program that Caitlin, Hannah, myself, a number of other people on our team designed. The SIPP program, they have very small caseloads. So there's between 6 and 7 students at each of our SIPP programs to 3 full-time staff members. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's about more of a 2 or 2.5-to-1 ratio. It's really focused on our students who have significant cognitive and adaptive delays. So most of the students in our SIPP program have diagnoses of Down syndrome, autism, that sort of disability. And really the whole purpose of our SIPP program is meaningful inclusion. So kids aren't just sort of sitting in the back, but they're meaningfully included in their program. And we do this through targeted collaboration between special and general education teams, a blend of replacement curriculum, so you saw Brian using the News to You curriculum, but also accessibility of grade level curriculum. You also saw him working on his grade level content in his math class. We have specialized sensory supports. Our occupational therapist works very closely with the students in our SIPP programs. An emphasis on assistive technology. Our speech language paths also work really closely with this program. We have differentiated professional development for our SIPP staff members and specialized program and student evaluation systems. So the first and the last are bolded here because those are really things that we'll be digging in today in our presentation. So that's a very brief overview, and we're just going to jump into how do we look at actual program evaluation? How do we evaluate the effectiveness of our SIPP program at Rocketship? Okay, take it away, Caitlin.
Is there a microphone that I should be using?
Yeah, I think that one.
tell you quickly about one evaluation tool we use. We call it the SIPP rubric or the SIPP walkthrough. It's basically the way that we assess program fidelity, and we assess not that the program is just there, but we want to look at the quality. We want high quality inclusion for these kids, not just for them to be included alongside peers. We want it to be meaningful and very intentional. And so we developed what we call the SIPP rubric. We're going to give you a couple minutes to actually dive into it because we want to give you the opportunity to explore. Quickly before you do that, I think it's important to note that last year we also rolled out this rubric, but the focus was primarily around just the inclusion setting. What was happening in the inclusion setting? How were gen ed teachers interacting with our kids with moderate to severe needs? This year, and it's reflected in the rubric, we actually added a pull-out indicator as well. I think that from last year, something we realized is actually that pull-out and meaningful pull-out is a really important part of a student's day in their inclusion program, because everything we're doing in pull-out, everything we're doing it in this small space, we're hoping to then generalize into the general education setting. So again, this year it includes general education and then the pull-out space as well, because we believe that's all encompassing of the students program. So take about 3 minutes. On your desks you have packets. That is the rubric that we use. We want you to dive in, make some notes, and then we'll come back together in about 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll be walking through some questions that you might have about the rubric. Yes. And for those of you joining us online, it is in the Edmodo folder, so you can access the rubric in there as well. As you're walking through, here's some guiding questions for you and your groups for about 2 minutes. What sorts of things do you notice? What might some potential barriers be to using this type of rubric or system? Did any of the indicators surprise you? And then what outstanding questions do you have about the rubric?
We just had a question about what grade levels Rocketship serves. We're transitional kinder through 5th grade, so just elementary. Okay, we'll take about 1 more minute and then hopefully tell you a little bit more about the rubric. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to pull us back together. We wanted to share a little bit more information with you after you have had a couple minutes to really chew on the packet. With some additional things about the rubric, and again, we'll be here afterwards if you have further questions. As you noticed on the rubric, there are, like we said, 2 separate pieces. There's a general education inclusion piece, as well as the SIPP room pull-out piece. So when we're walking through and doing this rubric throughout the year, we're looking for both sets of indicators. I'm sure you also noticed that there are separate indicators for each part of the Student's Day, and those indicators really represent our program goals, what's most important to us when we're looking through inclusion right now. Something else that's important to call out, last year when we did our inclusion walkthrough, we were looking at all of our students in the program, and we realized that that was really great because we got to see all of our students, but we didn't really get to dive really, really deep into individual program plans. And so something that we're doing this year that's a little bit different is we're following one student the entire year in every program at individual school sites. So again, we're not getting to look at every single student, but we're hoping that we can really, really support a school team with one student, and then they'll generate
generalize that to other students as well. So again, we're shadowing one student throughout the year and then sharing ideas that will generalize to other students on the caseload. Also, inclusion and pull-out room indicators are present, and then I think what's really exciting about the walkthrough this year is that we have participants from different roles joining us. We have admin that will join us. We have other regional members from the achievement team that are joining us, teachers that are joining us, speech and language pathologists, OT, and so the walkthrough group looks different, but it's typically a team, and there's a group of us so that we have contributors of different skill sets talking about students' inclusion programs and plans. I think what has really hit home with this piece is it's also a way to expand the capacity. I think at first we were originally thinking it's really great to get other members involved so we can really support the student. But what is actually happening is that admin and teachers and myself, I learn when I do walkthroughs, everyone's really getting to build their capacity, adults as well, and then they can use those skills throughout their day. So that's been something exciting that has happened as well. And again, we're here for questions after. Okay, we wanted to walk through a couple indicators that are on this rubric, some things that we might see as we're doing a walkthrough. I think what's really important to also call out is for these indicators, they are just indicators. And so when we're following a student, we're there, we do it quarterly, and we're following a student for 4 hours, so we're able to see a snapshot of their day. But because it's 4 hours and we're looking for a whole program plan, oftentimes we're going into the space and we're looking for indicators or presence of things to know whether or not it's being used every day. So right now, I want to show you some indicators of what we might be looking for, and then we're actually going to be breaking up into stations for about 10 minutes, and you're getting to interact with some of the indicators and ask us questions. So in the general education section, one of the indicators is behavior plan implementation. Almost every one of our students in the SIPP program is on some kind of unique behavior support system. And so it's really important that because that's a part of a child's IEP, we want it generalized in the classroom. We want the general education teachers using it. So this is an example of a student that might have a behavior plan and maybe they're working on wait time or when then. We would want to see those behavior supports in their general education classroom just to be able to indicate whether or not there's presence of the behavior plan both in the pull-out space and the general education classroom. So this might be an example of an indicator for that section in the gen ed setting. We also look at percentage of general education time spent in the general education setting. Our goal for all our students is 70%, and we're just about there, particularly at one site, which is really, really exciting, but we want to see all of our kids in the general education setting in a really meaningful and intentional way for 70% of their day. This is a picture of Brian transitioning into the classroom with his peers. He's shaking his teacher's hand, and he's transitioning into the classroom for the next activity. We're also looking at instructional indicators. So is their work aligned with their peers? Are they doing things that are similar to their peers? You know, in this picture, it's independent work time, and Brian might not be able to work on a thick work packet for 30 minutes, but we can certainly teach a system to him to be able to work and stay on task independently for 30 minutes. So this is an example of a workstation that's in some of our spaces where he's doing task 1, task 2, task 3, and then getting access to something preferred. This really helps keep him on task. This is an example of a writing assignment. Brian might not be able to sit and creatively write for 25 minutes, but we can modify his writing assignment so that he's working on some kind of writing to meet his IEP goal that's at his level. Okay, some things we are looking for in pull-out or the SIPP space. Break procedures, we really wanted to see breaks being intentional. The purpose of the SIPP space is to reset our students, have really specialized instruction happening in there so that they can go back into their general education setting. And so one thing that's really important is really structured breaks. We don't want to be walking into the space and seeing a child taking a 20-minute break. And so that was a big push this year. So here's some examples of some break routines that Hannah has in her room to really make breaks structured and predictable for all of the students. Something I think that's really unique too is we really differentiate between a sensory break and an earned break, and the way that they're structured is really different too. An earned break is something that a student can choose their activity. Sensory break is more what a student needs, and it's very monitored and coached by the SIPP staff. Okay, we're also looking at the physical space. So something that was really important for the SIPP or pull-out space is a sensory corner. And so this is a picture of what a sensory corner might look like that's appropriate and what we're looking for, giving students access to sensory tools. We love to include sensory tools in the general education setting, but some of these bigger, more heavy type tasks are happening in the SIPP room. Okay, really quickly, I want to walk you through the stations that you'll have an opportunity to join. We're going to be spending about 4 to 5 minutes at each station. You'll be able to choose 2 to go to. We'll dive into some materials and you can ask questions. So the first station that you have an opportunity to go to is interactions between target student and peers. We'll be walking through some materials to support this in an inclusive setting. A second option for a station is behavior intervention plan. We're going to be talking about some of the tools that we use with teachers to support them in making the behavior plan really, really chewable and actionable. When we give them our formal PENT or SACE behavior plan, it goes in one ear and out the other. So we've developed a form to help teachers really understand function-based thinking a little bit better and really be able to apply the behavior supports directly in the classroom. And then the last station that you'll have an opportunity to go to is use of assistive technology. We use iPad's AAC device for a lot of our students that are nonverbal, and we really view it as a way for them to access their learning in the general education classroom. So there'll also be an opportunity to go to that station as well. I think we'll do, should we do these 3 tables?
We might have to do like a cluster and a cluster and a cluster.
Okay, so if you are interested in starting off at AAC, you can come over here. If you are interested in starting at peer buddy supports, you can go to that middle table back there. And then if you are interested in behavior support planning for gen ed teachers, you can go to that table.
And for people online, we'll switch the mics between AAC and peer buddies.
Perfect. And for people online, we're going to be sending you to AAC and then peer buddy supports.
You're telling us when to rotate?
Yes.
Okay. And behaviors over here?
Behavior, peer buddies, and then AAC.
Perfect. We like to make it easy for you. I'll let you guys all sit first before I take a chair. And we'll do 4 minutes. Yeah, and you get to pick 2, so if the one you want to go to is crowded, go to your other one, and then you can go to that one next time.
Okay. Stabilities in them, I will go into their room, and we really start from like the beginning of the school year, just building awareness around like, why are these
4 minutes? We wanted to walk
a lot of these kids have never like experienced being in a classroom with, you know, kids that are so different than them, and so it's been important to just really like educate them and like teach them.
I think that's something, a couple things that are really unique is how we manage this as a region. We have one specific speech and language pathologist that's really supporting in management, and so one thing that she does do is reoccurring program development for teachers, that they really understand the purpose of AAC, why we use it, and what it can look like. I think the other thing that's really important is we understood that if we wanted all of our kids using AAC devices that were nonverbal, we could not have them all using different programs. We could not manage that, and it was really important for us to give students a way to communicate. So they all are on GoTalk now, but their boards are differentiated. And so the way that we manage that at the systems level is we have Google Docs, or we have students' names, and then we know exactly what they're focusing on. Two pieces of the AAC that I think primarily support with inclusion. So we have boards for kids to request food and request basic needs, but the way that it's used in the inclusion setting is for 2 different ways. One, during guided reading. We have guided reading boards, so every single book that's read in the gen ed setting, we typically try to set up a board for it so that the student can communicate and participate in the guided reading by touching buttons. So like this is a Go Talk More board that was created for the story When Sophie Gets Angry, so that while the story is being read or as the teacher has questions, the student can respond and participate in that lesson. I think the other thing with AAC that's really exciting is we also have comic strip conversation boards, so that even our nonverbal kids can communicate with their friends, which is really exciting too. So I want to show you guys that, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to kind of just pass this around and play. I can't find the comic strips. They're on here somewhere. But, you know, it's one tool that peer buddies can use with their friends that are nonverbal. You know, in the morning, if they're checking in with teachers, they can say, you know, "Good morning, Jose." And so, yeah, there's boards for really every part of the student's day, so that it's really intentional. So I'm going to actually kind of just leave this for you guys to play. We only have about 1 minute left, but do you guys have any questions about how we rolled it out? Or we'll take about 1 more minute and then transition.
How are the peers' responses to when the students communicate with the, is there any peer training that
I
goes on?
Yeah, so we do push in and talk about just ability awareness in general. I think it really depends on the cohort. There's some cohorts that are really, really accepting and excited about it, and I think there's other cohorts that are a little bit more confused around why they're using it to communicate, so I think it varies. But I think in general, just a lot of acceptance, and I think the big piece is that we want the neurotypical peers to also be using this and modeling that it's okay to communicate in different ways, and so I think that's been actually the biggest piece is that peer investment.
Behavior, talk about the baseline, hypothesize a function, identify a replacement behavior, and then create the SMART goal. And then from there, we just have a conversation about how we're going to get the kid there through environmental changes, teaching strategies, reinforcement of positive behavior, and what's our plan for when the problem behavior happens again. This we have found really facilitates the conversation.
Okay, all right, I'll just talk, oh, there we go. Okay, so I always start with like building their education around it as well, because I've also found like at first they were maybe like a little weirded out. Like when I was a para, I could kind of get the vibe that the other kids were kind of like, but it's not because they're like terrible kids, it's because they don't know and they're curious, and so the more that you can feed into like their curiosities and really just educate them, like the better. So I always come back to that maybe like once a month or once every 2 months. The gen ed teacher myself will co-teach a lesson around like a different disability or a way you can be a friend, or what can you do in this situation, and it's been really powerful. This year we have some students that are like definitely identified more as like our peer buddies, and like if we have specific jobs we need them to maybe do or help with, we go to them. But I also preface it like we're all peer buddies, like we're all responsible for helping every single person in this classroom. And I was telling the other group, it's interesting because the difference between the classes that I work in with my students and the classes that maybe don't have students with more unique needs, it's like the culture is very different, and it's interesting to see how quickly the kids will all come together to support one another. And this is just something I send home to parents just so they know like your kid's gonna be a helper and that sort of thing. But it's really useful to use like peer buddies and things like that because we don't have one-on-ones, to be able to kind of help them in a part of like none of our students have somebody supporting them through like lunch or recess or PE. So that's when peer buddies are like huge, because like we have peer buddies that make sure like they're always included and they're always like sitting with them or engaging them in conversation, engaging them in play, and really working towards like developing a friendship with our target students. It is, yes, but you can take whatever. And this is just an actual rollout system that the network itself had come up with for like rolling out how you would choose peer buddies, how you would like do a lot of the coaching for the peer buddies. It's nice to target a specific few students so you really can teach them a little bit about their new friends. Like, oh, if he's doing this, that kind of means he's getting a little agitated. Here's something you can do. You can rub his back and it'll help calm him down. Or if he goes like this, that means he's asking to go to the bathroom. This means bathroom in sign language. Like, make sure that a teacher, and just really facilitating relationships in a more organic way than like having an adult always be the one to help or do something like that. Yeah. So we have second grade is the youngest grade that I work with right now. At our other school, they have kindergartners. I'm not sure how that works exactly. So yeah, second grade right now is like the youngest that I work with. But I think you could probably adapt it in any way. Yeah, absolutely. Oh. Yes, for the audience, the question is, do you train peer buddies? And absolutely we do. We like to use some coaching around them, and we help them, understand like a student's particular behaviors, or maybe if they use sign language or an AAC device, we train those students how to also help the student implement those different things. Thank you, guys.
We can take a couple quick questions if anyone has them about any of the stations that you have visited, or just any outstanding questions that you have at this point in the presentation.
Why 70%?
why not 80 or 85? You know, is that part of the pullout thing? Is that why? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a little bit different for some, like we have some kids that are at 65, we have some kids in the SIPP program that are at 90. Yeah. And so I think that just as monitoring it at a network level, we needed some number, but it's certainly not that same percentage for every single kid, but it was our goal.
And we find too, I think, for some of our, like we have a lot of kinders in our SIPP program, and because kinder curriculum is like pretty accessible for them, they can generally spend more time there, and as our students get older, some of their cognitive and adaptive needs are greater, and they're actually just better met not in the gen ed setting.
I have a question about the rubric. I love the idea of having a preset rubric for program evaluation. How have teachers responded? So when I'm looking at the not yet implementing, like do teachers respond well?
Maybe Hannah can answer that question.
I do. You know, I love getting feedback. I feel like one thing as a special educator, especially with students with more severe needs, like admin has no idea what I do. So so they're always like, you're great, you're awesome, and that's nice to hear. But I like when people are pushing my thinking, and I know that our program's not perfect yet. I know that as a teacher, I still have a lot of growing to do. So personally, I like the feedback. So.
I was just wondering if that was kind of more the attitude generally, or if cause sometimes you get the pushback of like, well, I'm doing it.
I think too, like Hannah gets to see everything for gen ed teachers, and we'll talk about this too. We generate a few recommendations. We want it to, again, to be bite-sized, so we look at all of our recommendations and ideas, and we actually typically choose one or two that we feel will be the highest lift and present it in a very supportive and wraparound. No.
They'll get the whole ratings, but we don't give them. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we have to give when they're talking.
Right. No, it's okay. So yeah, she had asked, for those viewing online, she had asked what the feedback was or how teachers felt when they received the rubric. Okay. Last question.
So, yeah, the transition to middle school, how's that going?
That was a good
We were
question.
just talking about this at breakfast this morning.
We're trying to partner with some charter schools right now because we want our kids, we've built the foundation and we want them to go to a middle school where they can continue to be meaningfully and intentionally included. And then high school. Yeah.
And we do, it's pretty exciting. We did have a number of our students transition from our SIPP program into one particular charter in San Jose who didn't have a lot of experience with kids with mod severe needs. And so they actually came and toured our program in the spring, and we've been sort of partnering with them on building their program. So it's been exciting to be able to sort of reach outside of Rocketship as well. And just the one other thing I want to say before we move on, we are all about beg, borrow, and steal. You can literally take these things off the Edmodo website and put your own letterhead on top of them and use them. It's for the kids. None of this is proprietary for Rocketship, so feel free to use whatever is helpful for you.
So we quickly, now that we've walked through some indicators, we wanted to just kind of share with you what feedback might look like very, very quickly. Here's an example of a rubric that was generated in spring of last year. We have the purpose of the walkthrough. We share 3 glows with the team, some of our favorite things, and then we typically are sharing 1 to 2 big takeaways or recommended next steps for the school teams. A couple recommendations that have come out of it that we feel like have been pretty high lift, really focusing on student engagement during pull out, ensuring age-appropriate instructional materials. If our kids are in 5th grade, we don't want them, watching Barney, or, we want all the activities to be very developmentally appropriate, and I think that's actually easier done in the gen ed setting than the pull-out space, and so that's been a big focus. Placing parameters around break, I already spoke about that, but the purpose of breaks is to rebalance our students, bring their sensory needs to the point where they're actually in an okay place, and then get them back in the general education setting, again, in a really meaningful way. And then increasing the frequency and efficiency of special education and general education collaboration. This has been the biggest one. We want our special education teachers to be talking to our gen ed teachers. It's not inclusion if we're walking into a classroom and not knowing what the lesson is going to be about. There needs to be that collaboration, and there have to be supports put in place for our students to be able to access their program, because it doesn't happen naturally. Okay, and then wanted to share one other quick thing. Something else we developed this year was an inclusion checklist. So we do have our moderate severe kids, most of them are in our SIPP program, but we have kids that are coming to us from mild mod SDC classrooms. We have other kids that are coming to us from moderate severe SDC classrooms where we actually don't feel like they need SIPP. And so we have our whole campus, every campus is inclusion. And so we wanted a way to not only measure the effectiveness of the inclusion experience for our SIPP kids, but any child with an IEP. We wanted to be able to quickly be able to monitor that to make recommendations to school teams. So something else we have is the inclusion checklist. This is also on Edmodo. It's 5 to 10 minutes per student, and we choose 3 to 4 students per campus where we're walking through. We're looking at their inclusion experience. We're looking at our materials in place. Is the student physically in the space when we're doing the walkthrough? Is the teacher differentiating work? And then something else that we do, we really try to focus on in that part in the IEP where it's supplementary aids and supports. We really view that as these are all the things our kids need to be meaningfully included. So also when we're doing this checklist, the 3 to 4 students that we've chosen, we've pre-written down their supplementary aids and supports from their IEP on this checklist. And so we're also checking to make sure whatever is written in that kid's IEP is being offered in the gen ed setting by the general education teacher. And so we're walking through doing that checklist, and then similar to the SIPP walkthrough, we're generating recommendations for school teams and admin.
And just to emphasize that last point, these, neither the SIPP walkthrough or the inclusion walkthrough are evaluatory at all. They're purely designed to provide feedback to the team. So I think that's another reason why we don't get pushback, because people know it's just supposed to be supportive feedback.
Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing is too, we know that inclusion is tricky and we know that it's hard. And I think that, yeah, looking at it more as a wraparound, I think that sometimes teachers can feel uncomfortable, but it's hard. And we tell our teachers that, and this is a support here to really push you and get you to feel more comfortable with this, because it's not an easy thing, and it's certainly a lot harder than not including our students.
On one particular campus that you have in this area, how many special ed students are actually on that campus? And then do you follow them? So when you say your grade level, your 5th grade, so when they go into 6th grade, do you monitor their progress afterwards to see how successful your program was and how successful their transition is in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a really good question. We just started the SIPP program last year. I know that every single one of our middle schoolers was in touch with the teacher. Hannah just went there 2 days ago and observed her students and is offering support to the teacher. And so I think in terms of long-term trajectory, I think that's something we're interested in doing. It hasn't happened because we're 2 years into our program. But I think the biggest piece has been feedback from parents just around that transition, and the fact that they are able to be included in middle school has been really exciting, because I think something that's important to call out specifically for Hannah's program is we're not getting kids starting in kinder first. We're getting those 3rd and 4th graders that parents are just dying for inclusion, and so we're getting them really late in the game, which is exciting, but it's also a lot of work.
How many IEP students do you have in your classroom?
It varies by school quite a bit. In our San Jose schools, it ranges from 5 to 8%. At our Nashville school, it's 10%. In our Milwaukee school, it's 18%.
And then on my caseload right now, I have 6. And then our school total has about.
And how many students do you have in your class total?
Well, I don't have really my own class, but I have 6 students that are on my caseload, I guess. And then, you mean in the gen ed classroom?
Gen ed classroom, yeah.
Oh, about 30.
But 6 on her caseload, and then 30 that are on the special education caseload. We have a different case manager and paras that work with those students.
There's a tool that I stumbled across by Cheryl Jorgensen. It's on her website, and it's to, you give it to the administrators, you give it to the principal to assess the campus for inclusion. Like, how are we doing in terms of inclusion? So really neat little, the other one that I've seen, but it may be too evaluatory, is SAM-E, or I think it's SAM-E. It's Wayne Saylor's assessment tool for school-wide system. It was a school-wide systems change thing. So it's SAM is the website.
Cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, last question.
Are you also co-teaching, or are you just in there to support? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I am doing a little bit of co-teaching. I would love to be doing more. I actually had talked to, I don't know if you went to the co-teaching one yesterday with Mary Falvey. But one of the biggest struggles I have right now is like the behavioral needs of the students. So sometimes it feels like we're doing less co-teaching and more like one of us is monitoring and one of us is teaching. So we're trying to work on like building his independence so we can really bridge that gap so it's actually more of a co-teaching. But yeah, it's definitely something we're working towards. Sometimes it's more like I'm supporting and sometimes I'm doing some co-teaching as well. Okay. So I think I have a mic that works. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how different assessments and curriculum that I use to really see how my students are progressing academically. And the 4 main things that I look at, of course, are tracking their progress towards their IEP goals. I use some curriculum-based measures, different performance-based assessments that are typically within the curriculums that we're using. And then my favorite is the qualitative assessment piece. So I'm just, oh wait, can you go back? Sorry. This is just an example, a reading comprehension goal that one of my students has. We just had his IEP a few weeks ago. But basically, we want him to be able to answer some factual questions about a text that he's read at his instructional level. And the reason that I chose this goal is because I really wanted to align it to a test that they're using in the gen ed curriculum. So really like leveraging their IEP goals to help them, meet the needs of the general education curriculum. And then I also have to think about what are activities that he's going to be able to do in the classroom that are going to support him to reach that goal. And what are things that I'm going to be able to address through Tier 3 curriculum and pull out to help him address that goal. The test that our general education population uses at our school is the STEP test, if anyone's familiar with it. It's very similar to Fountas and Pinnell, kind of getting where they're at in reading. So it's going to assess their fluency, their comprehension, and their developmental spelling. So that's what our whole entire network uses to see like what's your STEP level, and it goes all the way from pre-read to a STEP 12, which is about an end of 3rd grade reading level. So this is this same student's data. The green or blue box up there is a step 2, and that's the last test that he had passed. So then he goes on to the next test, and it's a step 3, and he's not able to pass it. So we want him to be able to pass this test. And so this is really what's driving my IEP goal here, is how are we going to get him to be able to pass the test that all the students in the gen ed curriculum need to pass. And so, obviously right here, the comprehension conversation was really difficult for him. And I'm seeing, okay, the factual questioning, that's where I'm going to get like the most bang for my buck. So that's really what I want to focus on with this student. And then this is just like a little example of an activity that I might have him use with his general education teacher. I actually like type these little stories up of things I know that he's able to read, and then that's like kind of her job when the students are doing independent reading. She's working on answering comprehension questions with him, and I'm supporting other students in the classroom, or we actually have 2 students on my caseload in that classroom, so that's fun. And this is something that I really like to give to the gen ed teacher because it empowers her to be able to work with him. It builds that relationship between herself and him. And it really, I heard a teacher mention yesterday, well, she was a gen ed teacher, and she said, I do all these things with these kids, but how do I know if what I'm doing is working? And so I love to be able to have her do these things and actually share the data with her, because then she's like, oh, I can teach this kid too. And it's like, of course you can. But they just have this kind of fear around like, oh, what if I do something wrong? Or, so it's a good way to be able to kind of build their relationship and her capacity to work with students with more unique needs. I also love to use curriculum-based measures. One that we implement at our school, we use AimsWeb. It's just testing their fluency every week, a basic running record for this student. Same student that I'm talking about, his goal is to read 52 words per minute from a 2nd grade passage with less than 15 errors. And this is just an example of like what it looks like. We do this every week. Here's your 2nd grade reading passage, read for a minute. He got 34 right, he got 18 errors. So we're monitoring that every week with our students, and this is an example of one that I would use with a student who's not quite reading yet, just getting the blending and segmenting together. And then you can even do letter sounds, you can do letter names, you can take it back to whatever your student's really working on. And then it'll give you this really nice, beautiful graph. And this is the kind of stuff I love to share with gen ed teachers, because then they're like, wow, everything I've been working on is working for them. Like, you know, really empowering them, like, yeah, you're an awesome teacher, you're great. Giving them that excitement about working with our students is really important. And then we can see, like this in the yellow up there, the student's goal is to read 51 sounds correct from a grade 1, and he was able to do it in 3 out of 4 trials. Great, let's move them up to the next level. Let's set a more ambitious goal, and you know, it's always great when your student meets their goal before their next IEP. So that's great. Another curriculum a tier 3 curriculum that we use that I think really supplements nicely with gen ed curriculum in the elementary level is building with stories. Has anybody ever used it before? Yeah. So it's nice because it uses books that children in the gen ed curriculum would use, but it helps adapt them a little bit and make them a little bit more engaging for our students. And I just use their progress monitoring form, and really what I like to look at is the prompting. You know, how independent are they able to do it? How much prompting do they need for different things? And this is actually a curriculum that you can use in a pull-out setting, but it also lends itself really nicely to a push-in, and you could do a small group with not just like your student, but you know, other students in the class that are struggling with like comprehension or fluency, so it's really nice. And then of course, ULS, curriculum. Anybody use Unique Learning Systems? Yep, okay, so it's really popular, but I also we use the ULS strictly in our pull-out setting. It's really designed for students with more cognitive needs, and so I always use the pre and post test every month. There's like a different unit that they teach, and that's how I really assess like what's going on in my room, like how is the specialized instruction in a pull-out setting, how is that working for the students, and how much are they learning every month. There's a lot of assessments that we use. This is an assessment that focuses on fluency, so I can go back and like, this is really a phonics curriculum. So I'll look at that Ames Web fluency chart, and if they're not growing and I'm using this curriculum, I might reevaluate whether or not this is really an appropriate curriculum to use with them, or if I want to perhaps use something different or present it in a different way. I found that this works beautifully for some of my students, and it's completely unengaging for others. So it's really just dependent on the student need, like what I decide that I'm going to use. But this is just an assessment within the curriculum to help me guide my pacing and where I want to take this student. So I just want to take a couple minutes. If anybody wants to talk and share about some assessments that they use with their students, some things that they found useful or successful, or something that they saw that they're interested in, or anything like that. We'll start with like any assessments that weren't up here that you guys use and that you find helpful with your students. Oh, and they need, oh yeah, well, nobody's raising their hand. But okay, how about, was there anything that you saw that you could maybe see yourself using, or that you're more interested in hearing about?
I think the building with stories is pretty unique because they work with GoTalk now. So when you get their manual, they have the boards ready to go, and so you can even for our nonverbal learners, they can participate in building with stories, which is exciting.
Okay. And then, like I said earlier, my favorite thing probably about teaching in general is really looking at qualitative data and assessments, and really just talking to all the other key stakeholders that are involved in our students' education. Parents, what the student's doing at home versus what we're seeing at school is huge. If they're not generalizing what they're doing at school at home, or vice versa, like we need to work on that. I told a lot of you, like, when our students are at lunch and recess and PE, most of the time they don't have an adult supporting them, so it's really important to always be in communication with the lunch staff, the recess staff, the PE teacher, just to make sure that if there's something that's going really well that's working for them, or a particular problem area or problem behavior that they're seeing, that we're able to support. Paraeducators are huge because they a lot of times spend more time with the students than I'm able to in some cases. And then of course the gen ed teachers, because there are times, like I said, when the students are in class and they're not supported by a special education staff, so it's really important to get some input from all of our stakeholders. And I'm just gonna leave you with, this is one of our students who had graduated last year and is now in the middle school that we were talking about earlier. And this is just something that his mom had left us with and why she appreciated the inclusion experience for her child. Okay, yeah. And is there any questions at this point? Yep.
It's going to probably spill into your collaboration piece there, but I think that the input and the involvement of the families is really critical. I'm involved in a lot of kind of litigious cases in which the families are,
fighting for inclusion. And the districts don't seem to see the family as a key stakeholder, as a key role player in the success of the program. They just, and it's so sad to me because it's like free help. You don't have to pay them.
Yeah.
And they're like, they would pay you, or they are paying you. So maybe you could talk to that maybe in the next.
Yeah, the next section is more about collaboration between Gen Ed and SPED, so we can talk about it a little bit now. I think we are really, really lucky in special education at Rocketship. So Rocketship, our whole organization, has 3 pillars: individualized learning, highly effective educators, and then the third one is engaged families and communities. And so our model is kind of built on this idea of family engagement. Every single one of our students has a home visit from a teacher at the beginning of the year. Our parents are asked to do 30 volunteer hours every year. And so because we sort of have these structures that set up really regular communication, I think it really solves a lot of those sometimes conflicts that can come up if you don't just have the systems to be in regular communication. It's not like we're never in conflict with our families. It happens, but I think because we are in such regular communication with them, we trust each other, and so we're able to work through those so far without getting down any messy, litigious roads so far.
To me, parent like engagement and importance and input is like almost everything to me. I think because I recognize that I'm not like the most experienced teacher, and so to me, like that's just how I've always kind of driven a lot of the things. It's like, well, what do you want to see your child be able to do? And yeah, it's really important to me personally as a teacher.
Can I also ask about modifications? Are you doing all the mods? Are the Gen Ed teachers helping you with mods?
So it's different actually. So I have students in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and some teachers are better at it than others. And we have I work with a 1st-year teacher, so for her, I find that I'm doing pretty much all the modifications and coming up with the differentiated work for them. But then we have some more experienced teachers that are just like totally on top of it, and they're like, does this look good? I'm like, yes, that's amazing. So it really varies between teachers and grade levels, and some teachers I have to hold their hand a little bit more, and some are more ready to just do it on their own.
Now, do you have an opportunity to co-plan with the teachers?
Yep. So there is, within our school day, we have common planning time built out. It still is really tricky because my schedule doesn't always align to the Gen Ed teacher schedules for different grade levels. So I try to make that work with them. You know, I'll schedule something with them, usually on like a bi-weekly basis to kind of touch base on everything. But we do have to do a lot of like after school planning and stuff like that, because it just, the way the schedules work doesn't always allow within the day. And then I also utilize like Google Docs and emails a lot to do planning with them.
How many kids are going into each class? Like, what's the max?
So right now we have 2 in a 2nd grade class together and 2 in a 4th grade class together. I would be hesitant to do any more than 2 because even with 2, it's a juggle.
And are there other students with IEPs in that class?
Yeah.
You're just not supporting them?
Well, I try to when I can. I mean, my main focus.
On your caseload.
Right, of course. My main
other
focus
teachers?
is working with the students on my caseload, but I'm also aware of like other students who are either are on the other ISE teacher's caseload, or students that are maybe in the SST process or just need that extra help. So
then how many teachers could potentially be in one classroom supporting all of the kids? Because then you'd have the SIP or your program.
Right.
And there'd be another teacher for.
Yeah, it's actually kind of worked out where we don't have too much, like that's actually never happened with me, where we've been kind of like 3 of us in a room at a time. I think that a lot of the other teacher focuses a lot on like resource pullout, like for 30 minutes a day, so she's not necessarily in the class at the same time that I am. There was something
There is
else I
like
was gonna
cross
add.
collaboration too. Like I'm thinking of a kiddo that's on the other caseload who has autism, but he's actually like SIPP would be too restrictive for him. But he really struggles with comprehension. So that case manager reached out to Hannah, and now he's coming to the space or pushing in and doing the Building with Stories curriculum to really focus on comprehension. So there is some crossover if there's a student on an opposite caseload that would benefit from something happening. So if that, I don't know if that's additional information. So some crossover.
Yeah, and like if she's pushing into a class to do a small group, and Brian, the kid that we saw, is in that 5th grade class, and she has some other 5th graders in there, sometimes I'll hey, can he join your group so he can, have that extra exposure to whatever you're doing and get that, small group experience as well. Yeah.
To piggyback on her question, is there a number of special ed, I don't need mic. Is there a number of special ed?
Yes, you do need a mic.
It's for the online
people.
Is there a specific number of special ed students you allow in each classroom?
No, I think when the teachers the previous year are designing their class, they try to keep that in mind. Like they obviously don't want a class with like 15 students with IEPs and then a class with none. So they try to balance it out. But then as SSTs are happening and as like students come in from other districts, like.
And we're a public school, so we're beholden to IDEA. We have total blind lotteries. So as many kids with IEPs enter our lottery and get accepted through the blind lottery process, their number gets pulled, we get. And so we could have a bunch in one grade level, or we could not have a bunch, and we just make it work.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
I think Caitlin had one thing to add, and then we'll.
Yeah, I was just
Do a
thinking
brief.
when she was talking about, when she was talking about Brian, something else I wanted to share that was interesting about him. When he joined us, he had actually had all academic goals taken out of his IEP, so he came to us non-reader. He was not able to identify the majority of letter names and sounds. And I do think that reading is a super functional skill, and so we're always thinking about academics. How will this support them in transition? How will this support them in adulthood? And for Brian, reading really is a functional skill, and it's scary to think about. It may have been a skill that he never would have acquired if we weren't giving him access to those research-based reading interventions for kids with mod severe needs. So just something interesting about him as well. Oh, I have a mic.
Okay, so we're just going to talk briefly about data-based collaboration. As you could probably see from Hannah's presentation, we use a lot of data at Rocketship, and we try to make all of our instructional decisions based in data. And so, of course, that really facilitates the conversation between the special education staff and the general education staff as well. Oops, don't look at that yet. So before we tell you what we have found to contribute to successful database collaboration, and I'm talking specifically between gen ed and special ed, take a minute, we've been talking for a long time, to talk with someone sitting next to you. What do you think? What do you think it takes to have a successful collaborative experience between gen ed and special ed? Let's take 2 minutes on that, and then we'll tell you what we found to be true. No cheating. Take maybe 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that we have found to be essential for us at Rocketship, but I'm also going to ask you to share out because I heard some other things that aren't on my list, but were great ideas. So again, dedicated time for collaboration. We'll talk a little bit on the next slide about one way that we facilitate this at Rocketship. Obviously, teachers need to have time to work together. Systems that allow teams to easily update and review data. So Hannah was saying, for example, like Google Docs. We're huge on Google Docs at Rocketship because it actually sometimes when we don't have that dedicated time, you know, we can have a shared Google Doc where we're communicating back and forth on a student, and it can happen whenever any individual person has time for it. Or things like our STEP tools, Ames Web, some of the data platforms we use where any teacher can log in and easily see what the progress of the student is. Mutual understanding of individual student goals and staff roles in executing goals. So making sure that everybody understands really what the student's working on. We were just having a conversation over here about, we have a guided reading model at Rocketship, so all of our students participate in guided reading groups. And you know, we often have our general education teachers pull some of our very, very low students, not with their lowest guided reading group, but with their highest guided reading group, because we say, even your lowest group, the content that they're working on is higher than where this individual student is at. The student is working on sitting for 5 minutes and turn taking and reciprocal conversation and print awareness. So you can pull them with any group, and it's actually probably easier to manage them in the high group than the low group, the bluebirds. So helping the teachers understand, oh, these are the things that the student is working on. And a shared sense of responsibility for individual student goals. So we really sort of emphasize it's not my kids and your kids, or they're all our kids and we're all responsible for their goals. There we go. I know I heard a couple other ideas, other things that you talked about that are essential for database collaboration. I heard one idea over here. Do you remember what you shared?
Yeah, none of this is going to happen successfully unless there's a positive relationship between the members.
And trust, right?
And for those joining us online, she just had said relationship piece is really critical.
Yeah, I should have started with that. That was a great idea.
You know, and that relationship thing, I think, spills into.
I think a relationship is everything. For everything. You have the relationship, if you have the relationship at the higher level, you're modeling that for the peers. And so when I'm collaborating with you in the classroom, I'm showing you guys how to collaborate with each other.
Yeah, we have a PBIS model at Rocketship, and we use social emotional learning curriculum. And I was actually just doing an interview with Hannah and one of the gen ed teachers and one of our parents for this blog post that I was writing, and they were talking about how sort of like they can model some of that Kimochi's language working together and modeling that for students. Do you want to say anything else about the relationship building?
Yeah, I think it's what I have learned actually from another special ed teacher that was at our school last year, and I thought it was like, oh, genius. Like the first month of school, she's like, I just need to be everyone's friend. She's like, that's like my #1 job right now, because if I'm gonna be working in all these different people's classrooms, like I'll do whatever they need me to do. Like I need them to be on board with what I'm doing, and like I was like, that's genius. Like, and last year teachers were very nervous about working with my students in their classroom, and at first I had this mindset of like, well, why would they even be a teacher then if they don't want to work with all the, you know, in my head I'm thinking like, come on, like, but this year I've learned a lot, and it's more like, okay, that's okay that they're nervous, that's normal that they're nervous, that's fair. How can I help them to not be nervous? And so having that approach has also really helped my relationships with the teachers this year. Not that I had like bad relationships last year, but yeah.
Inclusion is hard work.
Yeah.
So I just want to share a little bit more. Hannah talked about this. This is something we implemented at Rocketship last year. It's common planning time. So this is actually a practice for all of our teachers in all of our schools, not just special ed. Actually not in Nashville. That's a whole other crazy story, but the rest of our schools. Every grade level has common planning time every day. So every day they have time where all of the teachers for a particular grade level have time to plan together. Some of it's quite facilitated by their grade level coach, who's a principal or assistant principal, and some of it's more sort of free time, I guess. Not free time, that sounds like they're playing games, like lesson planning and that sort of thing. And so that's one of the times we try to leverage for collaboration with the special ed teams as well. So it's daily and some of the goals. So this is times when they're looking at student data, checking in on systems. How's it going with the peer buddy? How's that Go Talk Now board going in the classroom? aligning on upcoming academic content so that the special ed teacher is prepared to do some of those modifications that they need to do for the content, and establishing goals and customizing schedules. So, you know, we've got an upcoming change in the guided reading group schedule that's going to impact your schedule, so let's all sort of align on that. So it's one of the systems we use at Rocketship. So we're getting a little bit close on time. Any quick questions before Hannah's going to introduce a video to close us out?
One more. Just that
I'm going to give you a microphone for people joining us.
I'm going to get it open on YouTube while I'm...
Oh, it won't pull it from here?
Pull in versus push out. And research tells us that push in is more effective in terms of inclusion because when you pull out, it's stigmatizing, and kids lose class time because they're being pulled out. What's your, obviously your pull-in advocates, just your feelings about that?
Yeah, so we're not a full inclusion model. It's just not our philosophy. We actually do think that there's some instruction that's better done in a pull-out setting. So examples are things like some of that really targeted, adaptive, community-based instruction, that kind of thing. Or some of our students, you know, we have a huge mild mod population that we haven't talked about at all today, but some of our students with reading disabilities, when they're working on that really targeted phonemic awareness work, that's actually better done in a quiet, distraction-free environment. So that's just our philosophy, that's sort of the best way that we can meet all of the needs of our students.
When you guys do the inclusion, do you do flexible grouping? So if there are kids that don't have an IEP, but they are struggling readers, they are struggling in math or whatever, I know one of the things that I used to do was I would pull the kids that had the special needs at the back of the classroom, but I would also incorporate kids that struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys look at that model?
Yes. Yep.
I think, yeah, SST, anytime that we have children in intervention that are in general education, we're looking at what resources do we have, how can we service them, how can we track their response to intervention, and if there is some kind of a group that they can be added into, we'll do that with parent permission and get that parent permission during the SST meeting and loop in the special education teacher.
And that really just allows us to maximize our resources. Yeah. You know, like we're a public school, we're in the same funding budget woes as everybody else. So we want to make sure that we're making the most of the resources we have on campus.
And then one quick, Michael Remus in Deer Valley, Arizona, Director of Special Ed, it's a full inclusion, well, he's got learning centers. And what he does on his campus is everybody gets pulled. So everyone has a turn to go to the learning center regardless of whether they have an IEP or a special need. So
Right.
that takes care of that stigma, which I think is brilliant.
Where is he from?
Deer Valley, Arizona.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to show what I find to be an inspiring video to close us out. I'll let Hannah introduce it.
So this video is the principal of the school that I work at, and I just wanted to I didn't really intend on him talking so long, but that's kind of how he is. And I just wanted to ask him, you know, how do you feel as the principal of a school? You know, what are your thoughts on this model that we do? Like, and it's really important because everybody has to be on board, right? It's great that if us as special educators are on board, but if the principal's not on board, if the lunch staff's not on board, it's not going to be an inclusive environment. So
We believe that inclusive practices for all of our students is important, not only for the students with special needs, but also our general ed population. I've seen the way that our general ed students respond to working with kids who have disabilities, both mild, moderate, and severe disabilities. It's really had a wonderful impact on our gen ed population. We see that our students without disabilities are developing their own character traits of responsibility, respect. They take care of each other. They're demonstrating empathy, and that's another one of our core values for students. They help students with special needs with their work. They're learning that there are many, many different types of people in the world, and that success comes in all shapes and sizes. And so it's wonderful to see them interacting with students who have more severe disabilities. And for our students with more severe disabilities, it's wonderful to see them engaging in grade level content to the ability that they can, and partnering with same age peers who are in the general ed population.
So with that, we're going to close out. Here's our contact information here if you want to get in touch with any of us. I think we've got business cards too. To be respectful of everyone's time, I think we'll probably go ahead and close out now, but we'll hang out for a while if anybody wants to come up and ask any questions. And thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.